To complete the circle, let's wire this up so that this YAML file is being used for our routes instead of this right here in our app.php file. So I'm going to exit out of this second tab here and jump back to our directory. And I'm going to copy the third step here, routes YAML converting routes to YAML format. And I'm going to go over to our examples folder, and I'm going to paste it in the source directory. So I'll open this up, paste it in, and rename it routes.yml. Now just putting this routes file in our source directory doesn't do anything. We actually have to pull that in somehow. So let's go back to the resource pack, and let's open up the fourth step called container.php, adding YAML loader for routes. And this will give us a clue as to how we're going to do that. Now let's also open up our container.php file from our Symfony 2 example folder inside of the source directory. So what I'm going to do is compare this container.php file to our next step. And I'm going to do this in PhpStorm by comparing with the clipboard. So I'm going to copy all of this code that's in container.php, and then I'm going to go over to the step file, and I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut to compare to clipboard. Okay, so over here we have our original, and over here on the right we have our updated. You can see for the most part this is the same. Now remember, our container.php file is where our dependency injection container is created, and where we register various services and parameters in our dependency injection container. One of the things that we registered was our routes, and the way that we did that before was we set a parameter called routes, and we just included our app.php file, and that was where we set up our route collection object and where we added routes to that. So now instead what we're doing is loading from our routes.yaml file, which you can see in this line right here, line 14. Now there's actually 4 new lines here, so let's start at the beginning. First of all, what we do is set up a new file locator object. This file locator is why we needed the config component inside of Symfony. It's what allows us to specify a location to look for a particular file. The file locator has more utility than what we're using it for here. We can actually set up a list of places to look for a particular set of configuration or files, and it can go through each place and figure out overrides based on the priority of the locations. What we're saying right here, though, is that we want to find a particular file in the directory that we're in right now. That's why we're using this dir, which points to the current directory of the current file, which is going to be container.php. Next, what we're doing is creating a new YAML file loader and passing it the file locator object. Now up here, you can see where this YAML file loader is coming from. It's actually coming from the routing component. The reason why the routing component is defining this is because it has a specific structure that it's expecting from the YAML file, and if we don't follow that structure, then we'll get errors that will tell us what specifically we're doing wrong. So here we have our loader, and then once we have our loader, we can pass the location of the file that includes the routes that we want to load in YAML format. So that's going to be our routes.yaml file, which we just added. And this routes variable now is the same as what we would have if we included our app.php file here, because you can see that we're setting a parameter inside our dependency injection container. We're calling it routes and we're passing it this variable. So this is identical to this over here, at least the result of it is. So there's a couple things happening here when we run this loader load. Not only is the YAML file loader from the routing component expecting a particular structure, it's also taking the data inside of that YAML file and doing particular things with it. For example, let's jump back to our code here and take a look at our app.php file. We create a new route object here. And so what's happening in the YAML file loader is that it's actually creating this new object and passing it these parameters here. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the file comparison. So this right here, this loader load, is actually doing all of the work that we were doing with each line where we were adding a new route to the route collection. I'm going to exit out of the comparison. Okay, so now I'm going to copy the code in this step 4 container.php file, and I'm going to paste it over the code in the current container.php file. And let's see if this works. So I'll jump back to our browser where we have our controller open, and I'm going to refresh. And you can see, nope, this is not a leap year. Everything seems to be working right. And now what we're doing is pulling from our routing.yaml file. Now you may remember from the very beginning of this series when we created a simple module in Drupal 8 that we used a routing.yaml file, and the structure of that file is identical to the structure that we're using now in our Symfony project. So hopefully you can see those two pieces connecting up, and we'll do more with Drupal 8 routing in a bit.